Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to unpack something really critical, how physical abuse, well, how it profoundly shapes a child's development. It's a tough subject, yeah, but understanding its impact is just crucial for the well-being of children, everywhere.
Absolutely. It really is about getting beyond those simple notions of discipline and really grasping the long-term consequences of harm. We need to look closely at where, guidance ends and abuse actually begins.
Right, because there's this idea that sometimes gets passed down, maybe even culturally embedded with sayings like, spare the rod and spoil the child, the idea that physical punishment is a necessary part of raising kids.
Mm-hmm.
But what we need to understand from the jump is that when that physical discipline becomes excessive, when it's really about inflicting pain, that's abuse. And it leads deep scars. So let's get specific. What exactly constitutes physical abuse in this context?
Okay, so when we talk about physical abuse, we mean any act of physical force against a child that's non-accidental and causes or, has the potential to cause physical injury or pain.
Okay. This includes things like hitting, slapping, kicking, punching, burning, or even shaking. The key differentiator from discipline, it's the intent and the outcome.
Intent and outcome.
Yeah. Discipline, in its most, let's say, constructive form, aims to teach and guide a child towards better behavior. Abuse, on the other hand, is characterized by excessive force, often driven by anger or frustration, with the primary result being harm to the child.
That makes the distinction much clearer. Okay, now let's think about the emotional and psychological toll. It strikes me that a child experiencing physical abuse must develop this core belief that they're somehow inherently bad, like they deserve the pain. How does that erode their sense of self, their mental well-being?
Oh, the impact on their inner world it's devastating. When a child is repeatedly physically hurt by someone they depend on, it sends a powerful message not through words, but actions that they are not worthy of care and safety.
Wow. Yeah.
This can lead to the development of profoundly low self-esteem. They start to believe deep down that they are somehow flawed or, well, deserving of this treatment. Right.
And what's particularly insightful here is how this can manifest in different ways. Some children might become visibly anxious, constantly on edge, anticipating the next instance of pain.
Like waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This can even evolve into post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with intrusive memories and a heightened state of alert. Others might exhibit aggression, almost mirroring the violence they've experienced as a way to cope or maybe assert some form of control.
Huh. So it's like they're internalizing the violence and then either turning it inward on themselves or projecting it outward. You mentioned that feeling of worthlessness becoming ingrained.
Right.
How does that play out in their daily interactions and their view of themselves?
Well, that deeply ingrained sense of worthlessness can contaminate almost every aspect of their lives. It can affect their ability to form healthy relationships because they might either expect to be mistreated or feel undeserving of kindness. It can also severely impact their emotional regulation. What might look like a child lashing out over a minor issue or maybe withdrawing completely into silence, that could actually be a manifestation of this underlying trauma. It's a fear response, not a deliberate act of defiance or indifference.
Okay, so it's not necessarily calmness, it's shut down.
Precisely. They haven't learned healthy ways to process and express their feelings because their primary experiences have been linked to pain and fear.
That really reframes how you might perceive a child's behavior, especially if you're unaware of what they're going through. It's not that they're choosing to be difficult, it's a survival response. Let's shift our focus now to how this kind of trauma impacts their cognitive development and their ability to learn. It's hard to imagine a child being able to concentrate on schoolwork when they're living with the constant stress of potential physical harm.
You're absolutely right. The chronic stress associated with physical abuse can actually lead to changes in brain structure and function. Research has shown that the hippocampus,
The memory center.
yeah, that region crucial for forming new memories and spatial navigation, it can be negatively affected by prolonged stress.
Uh-huh.
Think of it this way. If a child's brain is constantly on high alert, scanning for threats, it has fewer resources available for tasks like absorbing information in the classroom. They're in what we often call survival mode.
So even if a child has the inherent intellectual capacity, the emotional wounds are creating a significant barrier to academic success. It's like their brain bandwidth is just taken up.
Precisely. Furthermore, the fear of punishment can really stifle a child's natural curiosity and their willingness to take risks in learning. Mistakes are a fundamental part of the learning process, right?
Of course.
But for a child who's been physically abused, making a mistake can feel incredibly dangerous. This can lead to a reluctance to participate, difficulty with problem solving, and an overall disengagement from learning because the focus is squarely on avoiding punishment rather than, embracing discovery.
It's a really devastating ripple effect that touches so many areas of their lives.
Yeah.
Now let's consider their social development. Children learn how to interact with the world and build relationships primarily from their family environment. What happens when that foundational environment is one of violence and fear?
Well, the home is a child's first and most influential social learning environment. When a child experiences physical abuse within that environment, their understanding of relationships becomes distorted. As we discussed earlier, some children might adopt aggressive behaviors, essentially mimicking the interactions they've witnessed and experienced.
Like learning by example, but a terrible example.
Exactly. They might become bullies themselves as a way to exert power or simply because that's the model of interaction they know. On the other hand, others might become incredibly withdrawn, struggling to form any close bonds due to a deep-seated fear of vulnerability and the potential for hurt.
So they either act out the aggression they've been subjected to, or they shut down emotionally to protect themselves. And I can imagine that forming trust with others, especially adults, becomes a monumental challenge.
Trust becomes incredibly difficult, yes. Children who have been physically abused learn that the people who are supposed to care for them are also the source of pain. This can make it very hard for them to believe in the kindness or sincerity of other adults.
Right.
Their past experiences have conditioned them to associate authority figures in close relationships with potential harm. And tragically, this can perpetuate a cycle.
Oh, so.
Well, they might find themselves in unhealthy or even abusive relationships later in life because, sadly, that dynamic feels familiar. Or they might struggle to form healthy attachments at all. They may also have significant difficulties with authority figures outside the home, think teachers, employers, because they perceive authority itself as a threat rather than a source of guidance or support.
It paints such a heartbreaking picture of the long-lasting damage that physical abuse inflicts. And it's not just the emotional and social scars, right? There are significant physical health consequences as well. We often think of the immediate injuries, but the impact goes much deeper.
Absolutely. While the immediate physical injuries like bruises, cuts, fractures, those are serious and concerning, of course. But the chronic stress resulting from ongoing abuse takes a significant toll on the body as well. This chronic stress can weaken the immune system, making children more susceptible to illnesses.
Wow, okay.
We might also see long-term issues like chronic pain developing later in life, potentially stemming from injuries sustained during childhood abuse or just from the physical manifestations of that prolonged stress.
And tragically, we also need to acknowledge the link between childhood physical abuse and the development of unhealthy coping mechanisms, like substance abuse, later on, maybe in adolescence and adulthood.
Yes, unfortunately, some individuals who experienced physical abuse as children may turn to drugs or alcohol as a way to try and numb the intense emotional pain they carry. This can then lead to a whole host of additional challenges and complications in their lives.
A whole other layer of problems.
Exactly. And in the most severe cases, the overwhelming trauma and despair can lead to thoughts of suicide and even suicide attempts. It's vital to understand that physical abuse has profound and potentially life-threatening consequences that extend far, far beyond any notion of it being a justifiable form of discipline.
It's a stark and necessary reminder of the gravity of this issue. So, okay, knowing all of this, what can we do? How do we break this cycle of abuse and help both children who have experienced it and maybe families struggling with these patterns?
Prevention is paramount, really, and it starts with comprehensive parental education. Parents need to learn about effective, nonviolent discipline strategies. Techniques like timeouts, the withdrawal of privileges, engaging in open, age-appropriate conversations about behavior. These are far more effective in guiding children than physical punishment.
Yeah, teaching versus hurting.
Precisely. What's really crucial to understand here is that these positive methods help build a foundation of respect and understanding between parent and child. Physical punishment primarily teaches fear and resentment.
It's about fostering a relationship built on trust and clear communication, rather than intimidation and pain.
Okay. And what role do our wider communities play in addressing this issue? Schools, other groups?
Strong community support systems are absolutely vital. Schools, religious institutions, local community organizations, they all have a responsibility, really, to be aware of the signs of abuse and to have clear protocols for intervention when concerns arise.
So not turning a blind eye. Not turning a blind eye. We need to cultivate a culture where it's not seen as meddling to express concern about a child's well-being. Furthermore, access to therapy and counseling is crucial. For children who have experienced abuse, therapy can provide a safe and supportive space to process their trauma and begin to heal.
Right.
And for parents who are maybe raised in abusive environments themselves, therapy can be instrumental in breaking the cycle by addressing those deeply ingrained patterns of behavior and providing them with healthier parenting tools.
So it sounds like a multifaceted approach is essential education for parents, vigilant and supportive communities, and accessible mental health services for both children and families.
Exactly. It requires a fundamental shift in how we view children and discipline within our society, moving away from outdated and harmful practices towards approaches that are nurturing, respectful, and focused on fostering healthy development.
This has been such an important, albeit at times difficult, conversation. Do you have any final thoughts for us as we wrap up our deep dive today?
Yeah, I think the fundamental truth is that every child deserves to grow up feeling safe, loved, and valued. Discipline should always, always be about guiding and teaching, never about inflicting pain or fear. Let's all commit, in our own ways to raising the children in our lives with patience, understanding, and empathy, prioritizing their emotional and physical well-being above all else.
Beautifully said. And for you, our listener, just remember that creating a better, safer future for our children starts with awareness and a willingness to learn and, well, to do better. Thank you for joining us for this important deep dive.